Hi, everyone. Welcome to Both Sides of the Story. I'm your host, Alan Janae from CBS 4. Thank you for joining us. Our special high school debate series returns, challenging our students and our viewers to look at important Colorado issues from both sides. Each student will offer a case, ask and answer questions of their opponent, and offer rebuttal. We'll also feature an expert judging panel that will chime in with questions of their own. Both students have prepared a pro and a con case for tonight's debate topic, and they won't know which side they'll defend until we have a coin flip right here in our studio. Now, we've added a brand new element this year. Our very first rounds will feature two different schools, and a winner will be chosen to move on to a championship round broadcast next Friday, and then we'll ultimately name a Both Sides of the Story champ. On tonight's show, students from Cherry Creek High School and Denver's George Washington High School. So let's meet our participants right now. First up is Alex Shoflick from Cherry Creek High School. Alex is an avid debater and a captain of his debate team who will be representing Colorado at the NSDA National Tournament. Alex is in student government and active there and serves as junior class president. He will be student body vice president next year. He has also studied martial arts for 13 years, earning 3 different black belts. Next is Bena Smith from George Washington High School. Bena is a junior. She'll be a senior in August. She competes in public forum and debate and is in the GW International Baccalaureate program. She is passionate about women's rights and social justice. Also joining us is our special panel of experts who will offer their analysis of the debate today. They are Dominic Dezzutti, host of Colorado Decides, the election debate series produced in conjunction with CBS 4. Next to him is Natasha Gardner, articles editor at 5280 Magazine, and David Kopel, research director at the Independence Institute. Okay, time to set the ground rules. Each side will present their case, ask each other questions, and then have a chance to offer rebuttals. When it's finished, we'll go to our illustrious panel for their own questions and find out who they felt offered the best arguments. So let's get started. The issue up for debate today is public school teachers should be provided gun safety training and concealed carry permits as a benefit of employment in Colorado. Let's have our coin flip and get things underway. So, Bena, I'm going to have you call this heads or tails?
Heads.
Heads it is. Do you want affirmative or negative?
I'll take affirmative.
Okay, Bena will be affirmative. Bena, as proponent during this round, the floor is now yours for 3 minutes. Go ahead.
The first reason to affirm is because of the need for protection in an active shooter scenario. According to the New York Times on February 15th, since a gunman killed 26 people at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, there have been at least 239 school shootings nationwide. In these episodes, 438 people were shot, 138 of whom were killed. As the number of school shootings in the United States grows, the need for safety measures within America's schools becomes increasingly important. These shootings have been especially harmful because, as Tess Owen of Vice News explains on February 22nd, many schools are too big for assigned police officers to patrol alone. When you have schools like Marjorie Stoneman Douglas with close to 3,000 students, 2 resource officers are not going to be able to cover the entire campus. In the span of 2 to 5 minutes, an active shooter can cause massive amounts of damage. Once 911 is called, it takes several minutes for emergency services to arrive. Burr Russ of Forbes writes on March 23rd that because armed teachers would be on the scene when danger arises, adding more armed protection to a school is a reasonable and proportionate response to school shootings. Such policies are likely to save more lives than any gun control policy that has even a moderate chance of being passed. Because of the current political climate, gun control policies are unlikely to be passed and implemented to the extent that a school shooter would not be able to obtain a firearm. Because of the massive amounts of firearm in circulation in the United States, and lack of policy that would completely remove access to firearms to potential school shooters, those attempting to perpetrate such an act will likely be able to obtain a firearm regardless of implemented gun control policy. Thus, protection in the form of concealed carry for teachers in Colorado is needed. The second reason to affirm is because training would aid those who would possess firearms anyway. Teachers in these courses would likely be previous or current gun owners because of the confidence level needed with a firearm to feel comfortable in the class and in a situation where firearm use is needed. This can be seen in states that have implemented this training. According to the New York Times in February, most participants in the gun training in Ohio are school personnel who already have concealed carry permits. Gun safety training for teachers would likely be more extensive than the training mandated for these gun owners. According to the LA Times on February 22nd, when Texas implemented concealed carry for teachers, staff who volunteer to be armed must attend 3 to 5 days of training initially and annual retraining, including active shooter simulations. This is beneficial because the Chicago Tribune writes on March 14th, for anyone to prepare for firing a gun in public, it takes much more training than the amount required by law. Colorado Handgun Safety explains that a handgun training class is required to get a concealed carry permit. However, these classes can be as short as 4 hours, much shorter than the initial 3 to 5 days, and annual retraining that teachers would likely receive through the provided gun safety course. Therefore, the participants in these classes who would otherwise own firearms and participate in minimal training would be better prepared for the use of a firearm. This additional training would allow teachers to protect their students and themselves in a safe and effective way in the crucial minutes before law enforcement arrives, and will be able to avoid firearm accidents, of which extensive training aims to prevent.
All right, Bena, thank you very much. And now, Alex, you have 2 minutes for any questions and cross-examination. Go ahead.
So you kind of established this premise in your case that the SROs at these schools couldn't really handle all these problems on their own. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and SROs have how many hundreds of hours of training under their belt?
I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's about the same as the training that these teachers would receive.
SROs have to be
Probably
legally
more.
licensed police officers. They have to go through hundreds of hours of training to even become one.
Awesome.
So what makes you think that 3 to 5 days of training is going to remotely equate to hundreds of hours that you say is inadequate?
Yeah, so the difference between an SRO and a teacher with a concealed carry license is that an SRO does a lot more than just acts as a backup defense if it's needed, right? Teachers who have concealed carry licenses and would act if an active shooter comes into the school are only going to be the last line of defense. They're not breaking up fights like an SRO would need to do and like doing the day-to-day like things that an SRO would need to do.
Let me clarify my question. It's really just that you state that the amount of training the SROs go through is not adequate to protect our schools, but then teachers are going to go through drastically less training. So how would they be even close to prepared?
So that's not my argument. My argument is that these teachers would, typically these teachers would still have these firearms because we've seen in previous firearm trainings that the teachers that are signing up are those who already have concealed carry permits or who already own a firearm. So therefore, these teachers are not prepared, they're not necessarily prepared enough to protect a school, but this 3 to 5 day training will allow them to, while also allowing them to become more adept at owning a firearm.
Okay, I think I follow. Your other point is about, we need quicker response time. The cops can't get there, the SROs aren't effective. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so what happens when we complicate the situation more because when the cops arrive, there are multiple people with active guns and they don't know who the real shooter is? Wouldn't that lengthen the response time?
No, because what teachers are doing is they're acting as the last line of defense. So they're not patrolling the floors with a firearm and making themselves visible to this law enforcement as the active shooter. What they're doing is only acting if they're in imminent danger.
All right, Alex, that is it for the cross-examination here. Now, your statement in the negative. The question again, public school teachers should be provided gun safety training and concealed carry permits as a benefit of employment in Colorado. Again, the negative, your side. Alex Shoflick, go ahead.
I negate and stand opposed to the resolution that public school teachers should be provided guns and safety training and concealed carry permits as a benefit of employment in Colorado. First, teachers do not support teachers carrying guns. According to a Gallup poll conducted on March 16th of 2018, 73% of teachers oppose teachers and staff carrying guns in schools, and only 18% would be willing to carry a gun in school buildings. So what can we take away from this revealing study? Well, first of all, those who would receive this benefit don't even want it, and second, that only 18% of Colorado's educators would even pursue this option. In fact, our very own Denver South High School rejected giving teachers guns due to teacher outcry. Additionally, the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, the nation's two largest organizations of educational professionals, oppose allowing guns in schools. Thus, why would we give teachers this so-called benefit if a vast majority of them do not even want them and would not be comfortable working around them? Secondly, the plan costs too much. To begin, let's look at the potential costs of the proposed plan. According to the Colorado Department of Education, there are 54,453 teachers and 3,386 school administrators in the state of Colorado. If 18% of said teachers take up gun training and concealed carry permit, that equates to approximately 10,400 teachers based on the Gallup poll in my first point. Furthermore, according to John Howey, a writer for Congressional Quarterly, the cost of purchasing a gun permit in the state of Colorado is $152.50. Additionally, according to Colorado Gun Safety, courses for gun safety training can cost as much as $200 per person per hour. So this plan could cost the state of Colorado nearly $3.7 million up front for just 2 hours of training, with extra costs occurring when teachers are retrained and re-permitted at a time when Colorado is running a deficit of $700 million annually. $3.7 million is just money we don't have to spend. And to make matters worse, these numbers don't even provide the teachers with guns. Purchasing firearms would easily raise the cost to more than $8 million. Finally, the plan is ineffective and dangerous. According to John Donahue, a professor of law at Stanford University, in a study conducted in 2015 about incidences in which civilians present at a crime or shooting had a gun, only the tiniest fraction of victims of violent crime are able to use a gun in their defense. Data from the National Crime Victimization Survey shows that the victim did not defend with a gun in 99.2% of these incidences. To make matters worse, the FBI found that in 160 active shooter incidences, there was only one successful armed civilian intervention, and that civilian in that incident was a highly trained retired U.S. Marine. In fact, armed civilians have put law enforcement in danger and delayed law enforcement responses. Following the shooting of 12 police officers at a demonstration where dozens of open carry activists were present, then Dallas Police Chief David Brown said, "We don't know who the good guy is versus the bad guy when everyone starts shooting." When a man shot and killed 3 people at a Walmart in Thornton, Colorado, law enforcement noted that shoppers drawing weapons in self-defense absolutely slowed the process of identifying the suspect. Arming teachers would likely have the same negative impact. Public school teachers should not be provided gun safety training and concealed carry permits as a benefit employment in Colorado because teachers do not want this to happen. It is far too costly and is ineffective and dangerous to our students.
Alex, thank you very much. Bena, you now have 2 minutes for questions and cross-examination. Go ahead.
All right, so you tell us that the costs of arming these teachers are too much, right? But what other proposition do you have that costs less and that will be implemented, that will be more effective?
Sure. Well, first I'd just like to say it's not my job to come in here and propose a whole slew of legislation, pardon me. But in reality, I just need to show you that this is a bad plan. And it is. It costs way too much for us to successfully train all the teachers, especially if it were to be 3 to 5 days. The number would be way higher than my estimate. And furthermore, it makes law enforcement's job harder because you and I both agree. You said teachers are the last line of defense, right? Mm-hmm. Law enforcement is the best at handling the situation, and having armed teachers makes their job harder. And so when you ask me for a different plan, like I say, I don't really want to come out here and drag this debate into a different realm, but you could have gun control, more SROs on campus, which you acknowledge are better, practice drills with local police stations. All of these things have been shown to help.
Okay, so when you talk about costs, how are we going to be weighing students' lives with this cost? So if we're saving student and teacher lives with this policy, at what point is the cost too much?
Yeah, so that's kind of a false dichotomy. You're giving me 2 options that I don't actually need to choose between. The reality is giving the teachers guns is going to put the students' lives at risk more than not giving them guns. The fact is the police won't be able to respond as effectively. What happens when the shooter shows up with his mother's handgun and steals his teacher's AR-15? Right? You're making the situation worse and worse, and you're not making it remotely safer. And so you're kind of giving me a false dichotomy there.
Okay, so at the point when teachers are not going out into the halls and searching for this active shooter, right? They're not going out and acting as a law enforcement officer would. They're only acting when an active shooter comes into their room and threatens them with a gun, right? At that point, how is that slowing down response times for this law enforcement?
My first point is, you said they already own guns, right? These are people who are likely to have used guns, own guns, so you can't guarantee they'll act as much as you like. And so, to conclude my statement, basically all I'm trying to say is that assumption has not been proven. You can't prove the teachers are going to act how you want them to.
All right, Bena, now you have 2 minutes for a rebuttal. Go ahead.
All right. Starting with my opponent's point about how teachers don't support arming teachers. He states that 18% are willing. However, this is just enough to have like an effective system working. So because ultimately hundreds of teachers attended courses in Texas and Ohio, arming their schools really beneficially. So ultimately, even if some teachers don't want to carry guns, that it isn't a net detriment, because ultimately what we see is that these 18% or these hundreds of teachers are willing to carry firearms and respond correctly. But additionally, we don't want these 73% who don't want to carry firearms anyway, because they're not going to be confident in doing so, and they're not going to be trained well enough to do so. So ultimately, we only want these 18% who are willing and adept at firearm use to be participating within this. So ultimately, that's a benefit. But then we can look towards his second point about the cost of implementing this policy. Tess Owen of Vice on March 10th tells us that arming teachers is the most cost-effective way to increase protection, because the cost of training an SRO is 13 times that of training one teacher. So ultimately, what we can see is when we have these teachers where it's actually teachers armed, it's going to be more cost-effective than implementing other SROs, which may be more effective in that they can respond to other things. But when we're looking at the last line of defense, these armed teachers are going to act the best way, because we can see they have extensive training. But then he talks, his third point is that this is dangerous. He says that a very small number of people can defend themselves with a handgun. However, these people that he states in the study have not gone through this extensive training that these teachers would. Ultimately, what we can see is that these teachers are going to be much better trained than these other other civilians who have not gone through this extensive training. Then he says that we're delaying response times, but not all teachers aren't going to be going out into the halls looking for these active shooters, thus not delaying response times.
All right, Betty, you'll have to wrap up your rebuttal right there. And Alex, you now have 3 minutes to respond and close. Go ahead.
Okay, so my opponent's case is bound upon two big assertions. One is response times, and the second is safety. So why don't I address response times first? Well, I said that it's going to lengthen response times because in every situation, every single one without exception, as my evidence has shown, when there is a second person on site with a gun, it has delayed response times because of fire. My opponent has said, well, the teachers aren't going to be going into the halls and shooting at the shooter. That's not going to help. Then I ask again, why are we arming the teachers if you're saying that they're not going to be doing anything except hiding in their classrooms? At some point, someone's going to have to shoot a gun, and that's going to delay response times. Teachers get confused. SROs get confused. Everyone gets confused, and it delays response time. However, I will say this. SROs are way more trained and way more effective at this. They have been proven statistically to do so. I gave you 160 incidences in which civilians tried to defend themselves, and only one successfully did. However, trained officials are effective about 25% of the time. Yes, we would all like it to be higher, but in reality, that's the best we've got right now. All right, next let's talk about safety. In reality, there are a slew of problems that come along with arming teachers. How are you storing the guns in the classrooms? Are kids going to take them? What if the shooter gets a hold of the teacher's gun? Furthermore, what happens if the teacher gets confused and believes that that student who's running is the shooter? In reality, it's a student running from the shooter. You have all these things that teachers aren't prepared for. My opponent will continue to say that they're doing a lot of training, but in reality, 3 to 5 days of training is not remotely enough to handle an active shooter situation when police with hundreds of hours of training still struggle with this. So, when it comes down when you need to make a decision today, the major things you're thinking of are 1, the cost to benefit ratio, and 2, the safety, right? What are we paying for what we get? Paying for our SROs who are at least effective 25% of the time is way more than paying for teachers who are effective 1 out of every 160 times. Way more effective. So I'm winning on that point. Next, let's talk about the safety. You're making first responders be able to respond faster. You're making schools not constantly armed to the teeth. And lastly, there are 73% of teachers have said, we will not work in an environment where other teachers are armed. Not only are you going to have these 18%, which my partner says is enough, you're losing a vast amount of teachers who will quit upon hearing this. So you're losing good educators, you're not getting the bang for your buck because in reality you're training people 3 to 5 days for what? And lastly, the response times, they're getting way, way slowed down by the vast amount of shooters and the confusion that other people owning guns cause. Even a shooter standing in a classroom, say a teacher does stand in a classroom and does nothing, right? And they have their gun with them. An officer entering that room still might think they're the shooter. It still causes confusion. So I win today's debate because I'm providing the most bang for our buck when it comes to SROs and training with other police stations. I win today's debate because I'm giving the most safe reality for our students, and I'm making sure that the most people are happy. So that's why I see the negative winning today.
Will he win the debate? Bena might have something to say about that. Your final 1 minute close. Bena.
So first we need to look at the point of safety. The best way to defend students is going to be from these teachers that have this concealed carry licenses. Because they're going through this 3 to 5 day extensive training that is much more than the average 4-hour or short training that an average civilian would get, first we get teachers that are adequately trained to be the last line of defense. This means that they're not going to be interfering with law enforcement because they're not doing law enforcement's job and going out and shooting these active shooters. Rather, they're only protecting themselves if it comes to the last, if a shooter is in their room being in imminent danger. But then we need to look to the fact that these civilians who would still have guns are just going to be better armed and better trained because they're going through a more extensive training than they would otherwise with this short training. But then my opponent tells you that teachers don't support this legislation. However, then we tell you that hundreds of teachers attended courses in Texas and Ohio, and so we can see that teachers are still in support of this, regardless of if some of them oppose it. But then we can look towards cost, in which we tell you that it's the most cost-effective way, and hiring SROs is much more expensive.
All right, Bena, thank you very much. Alex, thank you for that very spirited debate. Let's go to our panel of experts right now and get their thoughts on what they saw. Dominic, what do you have?
Folks, first of all, I'll say you guys did a fantastic job. This is going to be difficult to judge. That's why we have some experts here. I'm going to let them ask some questions. Dave, let's start with you. Let's start with the questions for Bena.
I agree with you, Dominic. I continue to find it difficult to pick a favorite here. But Ben, a question for you. You had a lot of sort of hypothetical discussion, but can you name any real-world examples where armed teachers have thwarted a school shooter?
Yes, so actually we saw in Great Mills High School, it was an SRO that defended and stopped a school shooting after 2 casualties. And also in 1997, we saw an armed school official in, I forget the state, but they also mitigated the threat of an active shooter. And so even we haven't seen it in high numbers because very few school districts are armed thus far, but as that number grows, we will see more.
Natasha, a question for Bena?
You mentioned the placement of SROs and their difficulty covering an entire campus. Wouldn't logistically training only a few of the teachers create a similar logistical problem?
Possibly, but more personnel being armed in a building is better than less personnel armed in a building. So even if we have 3 teachers armed, that's better than maybe 1 SRO that's working by themselves.
Alex, you're not off the hook on this one. David, a question for Alex.
Alex, you mentioned how the argument that armed and trained teachers makes the law enforcement's job harder. Would you modify your opposition in cases, as in many Colorado counties, where law enforcement, like the elected sheriffs, would want to participate in the training of the teachers and support it?
Really, my point is this, and I'll keep reiterating this point. 1, the cost of training teachers for literally 2 hours of training is $200. That's $3.7 million the state of Colorado doesn't have. But also, it just comes down to our officers go through, literally hundreds of hours of training and still are only effective 25% of the time. Thinking that you're going to put a teacher through 3 to 5 days of training, even a month, is not even close to sufficient. So I think that training them at all is unless you're going to train them as much as a police officer, which detracts from their actual job, it's not sufficient.
Natasha, a question for Alex?
I think to follow up on that, so is your argument that having no training would be better than having even a little training?
No, it's not that at all. It's that we should have the guns in the hands of the people who know what they're doing and who have been properly trained to use them, not in a few people who have elected to take this so-called burden on themselves and train for a few hours and think that they can handle a mass shooter situation. The gun should be in the hands of the trained professionals, and instead of spending all this money on training all these teachers, why aren't we training it on getting 3 to 4 more SROs on every school campus who have been proven to be effective, instead of a bunch of teachers who, one was an SRO, as Bena pointed out, and the other one we don't really know much about. SROs are just more effective in general, so more bang for your buck, and you're keeping the hands of the teachers who don't want it, who feel unsafe with it, and there's a whole slew of problems that come up with that I would rather avoid.
Alex, Benny, both did a great job. Alan, we're going to need a couple seconds over here to try to figure this one out.
I think you're going to have a debate amongst yourselves
we
right
are.
now. We're going to give our panel a moment to try and figure out who won this debate. And that'll give me a moment to let you know that this is one of 4 different debates we're presenting this spring. We'll be back with 8 more episodes this fall. To check out all of them, you can go to cpt12.org. All right, panel, do you have a decision?
We do begrudgingly because, as I said, both Bena and Alex did a fantastic job on a difficult topic. I think there's a lot of lawmakers in Colorado that would like to have you on board to help break down the issues like this. But when it comes down to the different argumentation and the different points made, Alex, we're going to give you the round. It was a very close vote in our minds. You both did a great job, but congratulations.
All right, congratulations, Alex. You both gave our viewers a wonderful debate tonight, and you both ought to be proud as well. So you'll now go on to compete against the winner from our first debate tonight in next week's championship, Alex. And don't worry about Bena. We're going to see her again in a special 3rd place match that'll come up next Friday at 9 p.m. as well. That's going to be a good one, too. That's all we have time for our program tonight, and I want to thank our excellent students for accepting our challenge and participating in our debate. I also want to thank our esteemed panel for sharing their thoughts, and we want to thank you for tuning in. It is the support of viewers like you and our sponsors that helps make this show a reality. This is the 2nd of 4 episodes of Both Sides of the Story. You can tune in next Friday for our 3rd place and our championship rounds at 9 p.m. If you're looking for more information about this program or about the Colorado Decides debate series, go to our website at cpt12.org. And you can catch me every morning at CBS 4 for all of the latest news and information about this year's election and issues. And I'm glad to have learned a little bit today from these guys. For everybody here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Alan Janae. Thanks for watching. That is Both Sides of the Story.